Hello everyone, my name is Amanda Ruman. I'm a senior at Bloomsburg University. I am a double major in criminal justice and Russian and Eastern European studies. Today I'll be talking about how the United States deals with human trafficking from Eastern Europe compared to Russia and how it affects international relations. I chose this topic because human trafficking is a problem in both countries that should be addressed. Human trafficking is the abduction or transport of persons within national or international borders by force. These victims can be promised dreams of modeling or a better life in another country. There are numerous types of human trafficking, and the most prevalent forms of human trafficking are sex labor, domestic servitude, agricultural labor, and forced child labor. Human trafficking is a crime that happens all over the world, in all countries, rich or poor. It is not only a heinous crime, but also a business to the individuals who commit these acts. It is the fastest growing aspect of organized crime, and it is considered the third largest criminal enterprise in the world. The majority of human trafficking victims are trafficked for the purpose of sex and sexual exploitation. Adult women are more often the victims of human trafficking. Human trafficking is prevalent in places such as Asia, the Middle East, Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and North America. According to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, between the years of 2010 and 2012, there was 31,766 victims of human trafficking. However, according to the Department of State's Trafficking in Persons report of 2016, there were 77,823 victims of human trafficking. This shows that there is a clear distinction that the human trafficking is on the rise. One case in which the United States helped combat human trafficking in Eastern Europe was back in the late 90s. There was a famous case that involved a Ukrainian sex trafficking ring. The leaders of this notorious ring were Tetiana Kamasaruk and Sergei Mesheritsky. For 2 years, they would take young females from the capital of Kiev and surrounding former Soviet republics and transport these women to Mexico. From Mexico, they would then be transported into the United States. In those 2 years, they brought roughly 200 women and young girls into the United States with false hopes of a better life out of poverty because the Soviet Union had just collapsed. Also promised dreams of modeling and jobs such as becoming a nanny for rich families. Instead, they would be forced into prostitution, as well as sold into prostitution in order to pay off their debt to the people who smuggled them into the States. One day, a person found a video camera in an area which people were usually smuggled from Mexico into the United States of one trafficking victim's journey from Eastern Europe. They handed this information over to the feds in Los Angeles. In 1999, there was a sting operation to shut down this Ukrainian sex trafficking ring. The FBI, along with Border Patrol and Immigration and Naturalization Services, set up wiretaps on cell phones, and they also intercepted emails and other messages to take down this sex trafficking ring. They also sent in confidential informants and set up surveillance cameras. The sting operation took 14 months, along with Kamasaruk and Metsareski. 9 others were arrested for conspiracy to smuggle, transport, and harbor illegals. By law, each of the conspirators were to receive 3 years for each person smuggled. Now I'm going to talk to you about how the United States deals with and combats human trafficking. The Department of Justice, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Department of State are the prime investigators of these types of crimes. They work in collaboration with numerous other agencies and non-governmental organizations. The United States have allotted funds providing training and enacted numerous laws throughout the years that dealt with helping the victims of human trafficking and sanctioning the traffickers. Every year, NGOs' fundings are increasing. This allows them to spend more money on resources that will allow them to assist government agencies in taking down trafficking rings. It also gives them the capability of providing victim services. In terms of training, the Department of State has launched an outreach program which gives training to domestic field officers and passport office personnel. There is also training for flight attendants and motor coach workers. The Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, also known as TVPA, first prohibits all forms of human trafficking, such as sex labor and agricultural trafficking. However, it also allows the United States to rate other countries on how they deal with this issue. If they believe that they aren't working to their fullest potential, the United States can apply sanctions to that country. The PROTECT Act also prohibits human trafficking in the United States. More specifically, it makes it an illegal act for children to enter the United States for the purpose of sex tourism. The traffickers can face up to 30 years for each offense of trafficking. Next, there is the Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act, which prohibits fraudulent advertisements that trick people into human trafficking. Next, there is Megan's Law to prevent child exploitation and other sexual crimes through advance notification of traveling sex offenders, which gives permission to the Department of Justice and Department of Homeland Security to inform foreign countries when a sex offender is entering their country. With any system of law, there are criticisms. NGOs criticize the prosecution of human trafficking cases because, in some instances, law enforcement will put the victims to trial for prostitution. Sometimes it is believed that the victims are actually forced, when in reality they are. Another criticism is that the system is corrupt. Though one cannot assume that to be completely true without any factual evidence, corruption does happen. Corruption usually occurs in states located near the border of Mexico. Local police can protect the traffickers and even take bribes from traffickers. In doing so, they will essentially sweep the issue under the rug. Mandated by the TVPA, the United States ranks each country into a tier based on their government action when combating human trafficking. The first tier is comprised of those countries who meet the minimum standards for eradicating human trafficking. These countries set laws prohibiting human trafficking that are coupled with criminal penalties. They also provide victim identification and services, and provide funding for NGOs. Tier 2 is comprised of those countries who do not meet the minimum standards for the TVPA, but they are still making an effort to do so. In these countries, there is a high number of trafficked persons. There is also a decrease in investigations and prosecutions. Tier 3 also consists of those countries who do not meet the minimum standards of the TVPA. However, they are not making an effort to do so. According to the TVPA, the United States is ranked on Tier 1. And as you can see from this picture, the country of Russia is placed on Tier 3, and other Eastern European countries are also placed on Tier 3 as well as Tier 2. Unlike the United States, Russia does not allocate a lot of funding for NGOs and rehabilitation services. This was not true, however, in the early 2000s. In Russia alone, there was 100 NGOs established to help assist victims in human trafficking. In the past year, victim programs and shelters shut down in Moscow, St. Petersburg, Perm, and Vladivostok due to a lack of funding. Instead, Russia resorts to detaining and deporting victims back to their country in which they originally reside. However, Russia does encompass 2 criminal codes that prohibit sex trafficking and forced labor, which can be punishable up to 10 years. These criminal codes are 127.1 and 127.2. However, though they have these codes, crime rates keep rising, but prosecution remains stable. Criticisms of the Russian system is that many people believe that Russian officials actually help facilitate smuggling of persons into Russia and accept bribes from traffickers so that they can avoid prosecutions. Ways in which countries deal with persisting problems can greatly affect their relations with other countries. According to the Department of State, Russia is placed on Tier 3, and Tier 3 countries can have sanctions placed upon them by the United States. These sanctions include withholding foreign assistance for non-humanitarian and non-trade related assistance, also withholding assistance from institutions such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. The United States may also cut off funding for educational and foreign exchange programs. The problem of human trafficking in Russia might also affect trading deals with the United States. According to the Tariff Act of 1930 and the Trade Enforcement Act of 2009, prohibits importing goods created by indentured slaves and those who are coerced through human trafficking. Since Russia is not very proactive when it comes to human trafficking, it is possible that exports are made through coerced and forced labor. Consequently, the United States might cut off trading ties with Russia in efforts to push them to fix this issue of human trafficking that exists within their borders. Besides the sanctions from the TVPA, countries can apply their own sanctions. For example, in 2012, the Dima Yakovlev Law was signed by Vladimir Putin. This law was a ban on the rights of the United States to adopt Russian children. This law was put into place because Putin believed that children who have gotten adopted by American families eventually ended up being abused, neglected, and even trafficked. This law, to this day, has yet to be lifted. I hope that everyone who's listened to this video has learned something about the prevalence of human trafficking and its effect on international relations. Thank you and have a good day.